They're constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now, the Chinese are also ranked, given a mark out of a possible 950 points. A score in the 700s is considered good. Around the 500 mark is not. For now, the number is a sort of bank credit rating, keeping track of everyone's spending habits.
I think being ranked is a good thing. A society has to have rules.
It forces us to be well-behaved.
It may seem scary, but it's just like that here. We're used to it, and anyway, we don't have a choice.
But in an effort to keep all of its subjects in line, Beijing is taking the system a step further in 2020. It's aggregating data gathered by banks, private companies, and the state to rate if someone's a good or bad citizen.
By using the most data possible, the so-called big data, the system will play an important role in rebuilding a moral society.
The state will go over every detail of a person's life with a fine-tooth comb. Their financial situation, spending habits, career, even behavior on social media. Criticizing the government online or displaying outward signs of wealth is a no-no. On the other hand, praising the party or giving blood increases your social credit. Xiao Wenwang is a model citizen. She lives in Nanjing, a testing ground for social ranking. Married with a child, she has a job in a retirement home, no debts, and she wouldn't dream of jaywalking.
As a good citizen, I respect the rules of the road. If I didn't, I'd lose points on my social credit.
In theory, everything can be taken into account in the social score, even the most innocuous errands like supermarket shopping. When Xiao Wenwang makes an electronic payment, her purchases tell the state a lot about her. Buying cigarettes would count against her. On the other hand, nappies show she's an attentive mother. Beer could indicate alcoholism. She'd be better off buying water. In this pilot city of 8 million people, there are only 18,000 model citizens. For Xiao Wenwang, there are perks to be had, such as paying half price for the bus.
I get discounts for all public services, even at museums. And the library is free for me, thanks to my score.
A good score brings benefits, but people with low scores lose rights. The cinema names and shames people considered untrustworthy, plastering their details, even their addresses, across big screens.
It's a matter of principle. Those people have to be condemned.
Those people aren't honest, so they have to pay the price.
It's only right to pay your debts. You have to blacklist those that don't.
The Supreme Court has created a blacklist for so-called bad citizens, those whose ratings have dropped to 0. On it are companies, but also 23 million people to date. Among them is this journalist Liu Hu. He got a little too close to uncovering corruption among high-profile party members. After being sued for defamation by the subject of a story he'd written, he was blacklisted. But he only realized when he tried to buy a train ticket and was told he was banned from traveling.
That tells me I'm still on the blacklist.
Punished because he's been branded untrustworthy by the state.
Once you're blacklisted, you can no longer get a bank loan, start a business, buy an apartment, or even send your children to a private school.
Liu Hu is among a tiny minority of people who have dared to criticize the system, which some are calling a digital dictatorship.
I worry, because I think many people like me will be deprived of individual freedoms, and all of us will live with restrictions of one kind or another.
After our meeting, Liu Hu learned that his name had been removed from the blacklist, but he still has a long way to go if he doesn't want to languish at the bottom of the social credit hierarchy.
So you're the heads of China. It's a well-known fact that you have the ambitions to take over the world and you're growing at a very fast rate. One of the ways you're funding your goal of world domination is with your Belt and Road Initiative, a plan to make it easier for anyone to trade with China by creating a modern-day Silk Road of railroads, highways, electricity grids, seaports, and much more by partnering with nearly 70 countries. Because you're growing so much, your energy demands for electricity, oil, etc. are higher than ever, and it's only gonna keep growing. But then you run into a problem. The original Silk Road that connected China with the rest of the world runs through an area of China called Xinjiang, China's gateway into the Western world by land. Xinjiang is also home to a ton of natural resources that you desperately need if you ever hope of achieving your goals. It has nearly 40% of your coal reserves, 25% of your gas reserves, so in a way, Xinjiang is your most important piece of land. Now at first glance, this is great because Xinjiang is already a part of China, but beneath the surface, however, things aren't all that well and dandy. See, unlike the majority of China, Xinjiang is home to an ethnic Muslim minority called the Uyghurs. They look different from the Han Chinese, the ethnic majority of China. They speak a different language than the rest of China, but most importantly, they have a completely different culture than the rest of China, a culture that's much more similar to the neighboring Turkish countries than to the Chinese. Now you're not dumb, you know that a society's culture is the root of everything. The Chinese culture that you've worked so hard to maintain is what allows you to rule over your plebs in the first place. But then comes along these disloyal outsiders with a completely different culture that threatens your entire scheme. If this minority doesn't feel like they're a part of Chinese culture, they could become separatists and want to form their own independent nation like they have in the past, effectively throwing a giant monkey wrench into your plans by taking control of your most important piece of territory.
And the central government has long regarded this ethnic minority community, predominantly Uyghurs, as disloyal.
So it's pretty safe to say that if you don't do something about this little issue we have here, everything falls apart. You need to crush the Uyghurs' alien culture. You need to brainwash them into being dependent on the ruling class. You need to make them Chinese. And what better way to do so than with the time-tested method of concentration camps?
It looks like a Nazi playbook to me.
Zenz estimates up to 1.8 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have been sent to the camps since 2017.
This is a story they don't want to get out.
We would call that brainwashing. 没有那个完全改变他们的思想，我们就是为了让他们思想上的极端这个因素去除掉。
It's probably the largest internment of an ethnic or religious minority since the Holocaust.
Now you've been aware of this problem for a while, but you can't just all of a sudden build a concentration camp and start throwing people into it. No. If you want change, you gotta ease people into that change. In fact, you, the government, have already been incentivizing your native Han Chinese to migrate into Xinjiang since the 50s to ever so slowly dilute their culture. And although it did work, the Han Chinese now make up almost exactly as many Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The Uyghur people aren't as docile as you once thought. And in 2009, those disloyal outsiders finally thought that they had enough and erupted into violent riots against the Han Chinese. Now, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you know that when there's a crisis, there's a sweet opportunity, so here's what you do. By now, you know that concentration camps are really the only option left. But things are pretty heated right now, and although you can just detain everyone, it would be a logistics nightmare and would cause a lot more controversy than needed. So you gotta calm things down and figure out a way to ID the people committing thought crimes by turning Xinjiang into a tyrant's dream. You cry like these people are extremists, that they're infected with religious extremism, and that you need to flood the city with police and 24-hour surveillance to keep the peace. Now, whether or not there's any truth to this, it doesn't matter. It's all part of the plan. Have police stations, guards, and armored vehicles on every corner. Condition and exhaust everyone by making them go through security checkpoints for each and every aspect of their daily lives.
To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train.
Check their phones at these checkpoints to make sure they haven't committed any thought crimes by having the wrong app installed.
Rakima Senbei, who now lives in Kazakhstan, spent more than a year in the Chinese camp system just for having WhatsApp on her phone.
And since you have such a good excuse for all of this protecting the public, you can use this as a testing ground for the most futuristic surveillance equipment before rolling it out to the rest of China. Meaning you can easily make the lives of dissenters and minorities very difficult.
Residents have different levels of freedom based on factors like ethnicity and religious practices.
You can prevent retaliation by tying the purchase of kitchen knives to people's IDs by laser etching a QR code on the potential weapon. But most importantly, you can use this police state, this police presence, to categorize people as safe, regular, or unsafe. There are a few ways you can do this. You can force everyone to fill out surveys about themselves and their beliefs. When that doesn't work, you can just rely on analyzing people's movements on surveillance cameras with AI to see who's walking too fast, who's parked in the wrong spot, who jaywalked. And of course, you can rely on just good old-fashioned police intuition. Once you do categorize people, well, we obviously can't have people deemed unsafe roaming the streets now, can we? So what do? You round them up and move on to the step we've all been waiting for, our good old concentration camps. Now that we have our advanced police state up and we singled out all the troublemakers, it's time to start building the concentration camps. But here's the problem, the idealists in the West would never approve of such inhumane tactics because of the history associated with them. Now you know you're not gonna go that far, at least not yet. You're only looking to destroy their culture to forcibly assimilate them to your more obedient Chinese culture. So you gotta hide these camps from the public eye as much as possible, but if word does get out, we gotta make sure our bases are covered. So instead of just calling them outright concentration camps, we gotta put some makeup on it. Re-education centers? Re-education centers, transformation centers. So you start building, but how do you build these camps, you may ask? Just like a prison. Surround it in barbed wire, add watchtowers along the perimeter, flood it with even more cameras than the city, and make it look very dark and dreary to crush their spirits. Unlike a prison, since our goal is to re-educate them, we gotta have some brainwashing rooms, classrooms, where we can teach them the proper way to be an obedient citizen. One more thing to keep in mind is that there's a good amount of these outsiders in Xinjiang, around 9 million people. That's a lot of people to potentially keep in these camps, so we gotta make sure we build these as big as possible all over the region. Since most of these people aren't necessarily violent offenders yet, you can get away with squeezing 10 of them to a room and making them share one toilet on the ground to be as efficient with your real estate as possible. And don't worry, yes, this is gonna cost a lot of money to build and maintain, but just remember how important Xinjiang is to us. The ROI of tightening our grip on this region will be tenfold. Once these camps are open for business, it's time to start busing people in. Keep your requirements for detaining people for education and training very loose. Oh, you're worried you won't be able to arrest people before they commit a crime? Relax and just take a page out of the popular Tom Cruise movie Minority Report and use the justification of pre-crime.
I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin that was take place today, April 22nd.
重要的问题，我从一个走向犯罪边缘的一个人，我回到了 正常的社会状态，成了一个遵纪守法的公民。
So you have the camps up, you got the pre-criminals in, but how do you actually re-educate them? We basically want to turn these prisoners into docile, obedient, and loyal citizens, which entails making sure we break their spirit to prevent any retaliation or extremism and assimilating them into our culture.
You gotta break them. You gotta break them like dogs. Break them. Yeah, break them like dogs.
So just create a how-to guide for the people running these camps around this goal. Of course, you want to do all the typical stuff you find in a prison, controlling their every movement, preventing escape, really maintaining that atmosphere of hopelessness to break their spirit, but assimilating them into our culture is gonna take some more work. You can't feel a part of a culture if you don't speak the native tongue, so make them learn Mandarin. Replace their faith and culture with learning about Chinese culture.
Then they switch from Uyghur, their mother tongue, to Chinese lyrics, written by President Xi Jinping.
Train them to fear and be loyal to the ruling class.
And the replacing of faith and cultural identity with a different loyalty. I love the Communist Party of China, this man has written.
If they're ever released, if they just have a bunch of free time on their hands to ruminate and become vengeful against the government, all your work will be for nothing. So you gotta make sure they're able to stay busy by focusing on their labor if they ever get out. So train them on how to do very entry-level jobs. And lastly, but certainly not least, while you have all these people captured, you might as well use them as cheap labor. If you have any prisoners that aren't complying, you know what to do. Get the system up and running, scale up to 1.8 million prisoners since 2017, and you, sir, have just created a successful network of concentration camps. But with 1.8 million people, the friends and family of that 1.8 million people, everyone involved in the project, and the power of the internet and satellite imagery, word will eventually get out about your camps and how inhumane they are, and how we shouldn't do business with China because of their human rights violations. How are you going to handle that? Now obviously, we don't care about what the world thinks about us, but we can't afford to lose any business, so once word does get out, you gotta suck up your pride and control the narrative. At first, see if you can just delete and deny away any evidence from the internet.
As soon as we began to document the re-education centers, there was Chinese government officials deleting what we were finding.
If that doesn't work and the story starts picking up traction around the world, it's time to take a page out of your neighbor's playbook, North Korea, and put on a show. Select one of the camps you built to act as a showpiece for the world. Get rid of those Orwellian watchtowers, slap on a new coat of paint, and add in some recreational stuff. Only keep your best, most re-educated prisoners there and move the rest to other camps. Dress up your prisoners in knockoff Adidas tracksuits and let a select few journalists in while closely watching over them to make sure they don't ask too many questions. Control and schedule everything they see and train your staff to know exactly what to say.
It doesn't a place where people have to come, obey the rules, stay until you allow them to leave, sound more like a prison, even if it's a prison in which you can do some art.
你指的监狱是这个地方，你觉得这监狱有画画的监狱吗？我不知道你说的监狱是什么样的监狱。
Whatever you do, just make sure people look happy and that they're willing to be there. Even though most people won't believe this charade, that's not the point. The point is to get as many conflicting viewpoints out there to blur the perception, to instill just a tiny bit of doubt in the back of people's minds about what's really going on. With 1.8 million people, you're eventually gonna have some whistleblowers, but there's a very simple solution to this. Even if they're able to get out of the country to tell their story, they probably have family that are still in China that you have on record. So just kidnap their family to scare the whistleblowers into silence.
6 days after I talked, my sister and my aunt both got abducted on the same day as a retaliation for my activism.
You don't think it was a coincidence?
I don't think so.
And boom, in one somewhat swift move that did take a couple of years but is still pretty impressive in the grand scheme of things, you've gained a tighter grip on the territory that's vital to your quest of world domination, and you've got those pesky outsiders under control while you're re-educating them into more obedient members of society.
Have you been convicted of a crime?
我没有犯罪，我就是犯的错。
And don't worry, if for some reason a few years passes by and they just don't seem to be getting it, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Now, it is not the end of the fight. Those are the words of the leading pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, who has just been sentenced to jail along with 2 fellow activists in Hong Kong. The courthouse where they were sentenced, here it is now, all very quiet. There was quite a hubbub a short while ago as Joshua Wong was sentenced to 13.5 months, Agnes Chow to 10 months, and Ivan Lam to 7 months in prison. All 3 of them did plead guilty last week to charges related to a siege of the police headquarters during last year's huge pro-democracy protests. They avoided tougher sentences, though, as the charges were lodged before China introduced its tough national security law in Hong Kong. Under the terms of those laws, they could have been jailed for life. Well, Martin Yip in Hong Kong gave me this update.
Magistrate Wong Si-lai has been describing the 3 defendants' role in this incident, which took place on the 21st of June 2019 in her judgment. And she described Joshua Wong as actively organizing this whole protest outside of the police headquarters non-stop. And she said she believes Joshua Wong did it deliberately. And then as for Agnes Chow, she also described her as an active participant in the event because of facts like holding the megaphone for Joshua Wong as well as chanting the slogans. It's somehow an irony if you recall what happened last year. Many people called this protest since the beginning of last June as protest with no main stage, so to speak, which means it's almost a leaderless campaign. Yet today, this beside of the fact that the three of them pleaded guilty to the charges, the magistrate also found them organizing the protest, which some protesters might not agree. But anyway, that's the verdict that we have from the court. So if they would have done it any time after the 30th of June this year, the reason for me to repeat this date is the very day where Beijing's parliament, the Chinese parliament, has passed this piece of Hong Kong national security law and proclaimed it in Hong Kong, which took into effect immediately. If police would press charges on them now, if the event takes place anytime after that day now, and police choose to press charges on the grounds of national security, they might end up facing life imprisonment or even facing trials in mainland China and prison terms in mainland China. That's a huge difference from what happened when they took part in this rally last year.
Yeah, now obviously supporters of all three will be upset, disappointed, angry. One might expect, under certain circumstances, Martin, for them to want to come out and demonstrate, but there are conditions attached to any gatherings at the moment.
Exactly. There are reports of around 100 people outside of the courthouse building showing their support to the three of them, but yet the COVID-19 measures, coronavirus measures, has just been reset at midnight this morning. We are now back to the stage where any gathering of more than two people will be seen as illegal. So anyone who wants to come out to show their support would really have to think twice, especially when there are multiple reports emerging at the very same time that the government is about to announce the increase of fine on these COVID-19 preventive measures, almost like tripling the amount of fine that could have drawn from these charges. So it could be quite a trouble for anyone who wants to show the support to Joshua, Agnes, and Ivan.
Welcome back, everyone. While the establishment pushes its manufactured Russia scandal, here on The Next Revolution, we like to focus on actual scandals. You know, things like mounting evidence that the leading Democratic candidate for president has been compromised by America's #1 enemy. As we've reported on Swamp Watch, Joe Biden, while he was vice president, took billions of dollars in bribes from the Chinese government in the form of payments to his son Hunter's businesses. In exchange, Biden was soft on Chinese military and economic aggression. I asked President Trump about it. Don't you think that should be investigated, that financial connection, the Chinese government putting billions of dollars into Biden family business?
100%. It's a disgrace. And then he says China is not a competitor of ours. China is a massive competitor of ours.
It's also a massive abuser of human rights. And guess who's helping them do that? The Chinese government has recently developed a phone application designed to surveil ethnic minority Muslims. The technology relies on facial recognition software created by a Chinese company called Face++, which is a division of a major startup called Megvii. And one of Megvii's most prominent investors is none other than Hunter Biden, even as Joe runs for president. The Biden family is profiting from helping the authoritarian Chinese regime oppress its religious minorities. Hashtag Joe China. Spread the word. All right, let's discuss Joe China. I can't stop saying it. We can have a discussion about whether that's the right way around in a minute.
I thought it should be China Joe. But
let's get to a minute. Let's do the substance of it first. Okay. I mean, just look at this. I mean, President Trump, they're saying this. of all this investigation going on and this glaring, outrageous connection here, this financial tie, and no one's interested in investigating.
The media is not interested in reporting on the ties that Hunter Biden has to China. I'm shocked. But what's interesting is John Kerry's son-in-law and Hunter Biden, these aren't investor whiz kids. I mean, you're in the heart of New York. They could come here, and if they're that good, they'd get billions of dollars in the United States of America. But instead, they go to China, where political influence matters, and buying off the American government matters. And they knew they can get to Joe Biden's heart through his son, Hunter Biden. This reeks to high heaven. And I'm just one who looks at this, and I think the media should report on it. They should expose it, just like they've gone after Donald Trump. And I mean, you look at President Trump.
Never mind the media. I mean, what's Congress doing here? I know you're not in control of the committees, but I mean, in the House. But shouldn't there be congressional investigation? I mean, the stuff they're looking into with Trump, I mean, compared to this.
Exactly. Like we talked about in the last block, we have over 6 committees investigating Trump for various things, and nothing is happening with that. It blows my mind, too, that the multiple levels from China that are a negative and a very real threat to our country. How is it that these billions of dollars of influence for decades has been ignored? We have them on the Arctic Circle Council as observers, but they've stated their interest in hydrocarbons, the shipping lanes, and also nuclear-powered submarines and icebreakers. We have them stealing intellectual property from us at the tune of $600 billion a year. We have also prosecuted the largest group of former intelligence agents, U.S., for conveying trade secrets, national defense trade secrets, to China in the last year. So in all facets, not to mention the human rights abuses, so in all facets, they are a very real threat, and those decades of influence is somehow being ignored.
And this is never mind, people get upset about Russia. China is by far a bigger threat economically, militarily. They literally have a stated goal of toppling America as the world superpower. How on earth could Joe Biden, if he's president, with a straight face, negotiate with a government who's put billions of dollars into his family's businesses?
Well, that's a great question. And also, I mean, it's reminiscent of Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation and the fact of course, all these different countries are going to try to buy access to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State via the Clinton Foundation. And we saw that of foreign officials trying to access Hillary Clinton through the Clinton Foundation, trying to set up meetings because they couldn't get a hold of her via, official State Department channels. And you also look at the fact of, we've been talking about Russia collusion for, 2 years now. And if you want to look at your collusion, Hillary Clinton and this via the Steele dossier and literally paying to access Russian officials and people that are close to Putin, spies as well. That's where that information came from. So, but nobody's wanted to get to the bottom of that.
And the thing that's outrageous to me about all of this is that in the midst of all this, you've got President Trump, who, even his worst enemies would concede, is just sort of obsessed with America and doing the right thing for America. The idea that he's going to kind of sell out America.
And so here you have Joe Biden, who puts his family first and their pockets book first by $1 billion going to his son, and Donald Trump puts America first. A great distinction between the two.
Now, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, that's the age-old philosophical thought experiment about perception and observation. But after this weekend, we can modify it this way. If a Trump march draws tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of peaceful, patriotic people to Washington, and no one's around to report it, did it really occur? Well, it was billed as the Million MAGA March. That's more than tens of thousands. And you look at it by the overhead shots, it could be one of the biggest grassroots protests the Capitol has ever seen. Attendees were families, young, old, black, white, Hispanic. They came from near and far, all to support the America First agenda and to stand with the man who has endured so much in order to lead the movement.
Winning Trump forever. For the very first time, I voted. And I voted for Donald J. Trump. He's fought through thick and thin. He's been bombarded with one thing after another, and the American people know it, and you can see by the support.
We got to make sure our president get back in that office 4 more years.
Now, it's a fair guess that most in that gigantic crowd are convinced that Trump won the election. And it's likewise reasonable for them to conclude that they don't have much trust in the U.S. media. Now, pockets, by the way, were even chanting against this news channel for what they perceive as election night bias against the president. Others were rightfully outraged that few networks were even carrying the rally at all, and the ones who did were only interested in insulting the attendees.
The president's supporters, they've poured into the streets of Washington this weekend to try to give life to these unfounded and baseless claims of a rigged election. How did this become normal?
I think with some of these demonstrators, good luck getting a clear or fact-based, logical answer to some of the questions you're posing.
These people are fundamentally a joke. These aren't serious people. These are members of a cult. I hope they get frostbite.
I hope they get frostbite, is what he said. Now, remember, these talking heads are some of the kind, tolerant, unifying, and loving people that Biden and Harris claim make up their movement. Well, 73 million people voted for President Trump, and it's not too much for them to expect, is it, that the media treat them fairly and respectfully. Likewise, it's not too much for them to expect that only legal votes will be counted, and that their votes must not be nullified due to fraud. Now, for years now, I've been speaking about this type of honest, hardworking Americans who came to Washington over the weekend. And throughout this time, the so-called elites in our nation's capital have responded to the legitimate concerns of American citizens with mockery and contempt. It's dumbfounding to me that the media and Democrats still don't understand what a stupid strategy it is to alienate and dismiss all of these Americans. I think they're making the same mistake they made back in 2009 and 2010 when the much smaller Tea Party movement started.
You see the Tea Party movement as a real political force this year?
Look, it seems to be a very successful private enterprise.
Nobody actually knows what they're for. We just know what they are against.
It's not about taxes. This is about hating a black man in the White House.
We call it astroturf. It's not really a grassroots movement.
Those of you who are watching certain news channels that on which I'm not very popular, and you see folks waving tea bags around.
They thought that all that condescension would make the movement go away. But it only made the Tea Party stronger. Less than 2 years after those insults, Republicans took control of the House in 2010. Now, some of the Tea Party candidates included those little-known people, Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Tim Scott, and Mike Lee. And 4 years later, the GOP took control of the Senate. 2 years after that, Donald Trump was elected president. Now, the difference between the Tea Party then and President Trump's movement now is that this movement now has a lot more clarity about what it wants. The same Trump economic and foreign policy agenda that led to higher wages, fewer wars. And whatever the final electoral college tally is in this election, this movement has a proven track record of success on everything from achieving our energy independence to challenging China to fast-tracking a COVID vaccine to raising family incomes. The results were so impressive that not only did President Trump broaden his coalition among working-class Americans, but he helped grow the party's numbers in the House. When all those vaunted media experts with all their credentials were predicting the opposite. They claimed Trump was going to shrink the party, remember that? Especially among minorities. Wrong again.
Blacks and Latinos are doing much better under Trump versus Obama. Yeah, absolutely.
Opportunity zones, which is something that, in my opinion, is the largest economic empowerment program for the black community since probably Reconstruction.
We've done a lot of things, and I've been seeing a lot of business come to my neighborhood. I've been seeing a lot of black people own homes.
Why couldn't the networks find these people to interview? They were there. We found them. In a Biden administration, that you just saw, all those gains, are going to be flushed down the toilet. His handlers, who are basically all the old Obama staffers, believe in something called the Great Reset of capitalism. I told you about this last week. It's a plan to force a more equitable distribution of global resources. Translation, most Americans will have less freedom and less money, except for the same elites who always find a way around the rules. Like during the lockdowns, when the families of these mini tyrants skirted the restrictions. Just last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom was dining with a prohibited number of pals at that exclusive restaurant, the French Laundry. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot was caught partying maskless in a massive crowd celebrating Biden's unofficial election win. No problem at all. And Pelosi, well, she was going to have a big congressional soiree until she was shamed into canceling it. The American people are onto these frauds. The MAGA marchers certainly couldn't have been clearer about what COVID lockdowns and restrictions have done to America.
It's like, and what Trump said in the beginning, the cure can't be worse than the disease itself. People, we still need to go on.
Trying to finish off any business that was able to hang on by the skin of their teeth, and the last closures, they'll finish them off.
People are hurting. Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, they all talk about caring about the American people, but you shut this country down for 4 to 6 weeks, and you're going to it'll be the final nail in the coffin for a lot of small businesses.
100% true. But so far, Joe Biden and his handlers aren't listening. Biden loves to talk about dignity and unity and respect. But the time for talk is over and the time for action is here. Because if Biden really wanted to unite the country, he wouldn't even be entertaining the idea of destroying our current economic recovery with another devastating lockdown or series of lockdowns. If Biden really wanted to unite the country, he would not dismiss the concerns of tens of millions of Americans about mail-in voting. Instead, he'd do something like, appoint a bipartisan commission to answer every question about how this election was conducted and to make certain that we will never have to wait so long for an accurate count. And if Joe Biden really wanted to unite the country, he would have personally and on camera condemn the BLM and Antifa thugs who beat, kicked, and harassed Trump supporters on Saturday. He has done none of these things. He still hopes this movement's just going to go away. But that's not going to happen. Here are a few hard truths for Joe Biden, his handlers, and his enablers in the press corps. You know who you are. The pro-Trump throngs didn't show up in D.C. on Saturday because of conservative media, because we told them to. They showed up knowing they could be physically attacked for doing so because they love America. And lying about them, insulting them, ignoring them will only incite more violence and more resentment and opposition. All Americans deserve to be heard, to be seen, and to be safe. It's the least a government can do for its citizens. And that's the angle.
In Philadelphia this weekend, a mob of about 1,000 Joe Biden voters beat an effigy of the sitting president. Why'd they do that? They say they just beat him, but they did. Sandy Cortez called for activists to, quote, archive the name of Trump supporters. And then today, a well-funded Democratic operation, funded mostly by hedge fund managers and Silicon Valley tycoons, it's called the Lincoln Project, tweeted out personally identifying information for the attorneys representing the Trump campaign in voter fraud litigation. Quote, here are the 2 attorneys attempting to help Trump overturn the will of the Pennsylvanian people. They also encouraged lunatics to harass attorneys at another prominent law firm representing the Pennsylvania Republican Party. Make them famous, the Lincoln Project said. How's that different from hurt them? Well, of course it's not. Where's this going, and what's it about? Tammy Bruce, one of the most insightful people on topics like this. We're happy to have her. She's the host of Get Tammy Bruce on Fox Nation. Tammy, thanks for coming on. So why, when they say they've won, would they be even angrier? And why, further still, would they be trying to get people they disagree with hurt?
Well, it's in their nature. And we've seen this play out actually before this election. The riots, right? That is a signal of this as well, is an effort and a desire to punish people who are different, who accomplish something different from you, who maybe embarrassed you, who make you feel perhaps inadequate. And it's not, their fault, but it's about this notion on the left that any problem you have is due to someone else. Someone else did it to you, and that's going to have to manifest somehow. But all of these projects have resulted in lists, and it's in media. It's, yes, the Lincoln Project. Another project was announced after that AOC tweet called the Trump Accountability Project, which is a list, Tucker, of Supreme Court justices, regular judges, White House staff, family members, other politicians who assisted President Trump. It is literally a Stalinistic tactic. And the making of lists in our history, of the human history, has never ended well. But it does provide us a stark alarm about what people are capable of and what they want to do. So when people have thought, oh, the Democrats and the people that hate Trump and have been doing all of this are well-meaning, they're just misguided. No, they're not well-meaning. They know what they're doing. These are smart political people. They understand the history of this, but they're doing it because they feel they can. And the American people rejected it, interestingly, in this election. Down ballot, it was a red wave. And if they continue on this track of cancel culture and purge lists, the American people are going to give them another kick in the bottom in 2022. And also in Georgia with those two senators, people are going to be looking at these runoff elections thinking, is this what we want?
Well, I hope so, because what's interesting and alarming is they weren't doing this last week or last year when they thought they had less power. The second they thought they had control, they became more extreme. Shouldn't they calm down and be magnanimous? Why are they doing this now? That worries me. Well, they've always wanted to do it. They're doing it now because they feel that there'll be genuinely no repercussions. There'll be no problem. Right. That they, in fact, maybe will be rewarded. I'm waiting to hear the Biden campaign, Kamala Harris, the Obama campaign, everybody condemn this, repudiate it. We have yet to hear that. So we have this message of unity and healing, but ignore the guillotine, Tucker, because that's a mostly peaceful machine. Tammy, I knew you'd explain it. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
At a May Day protest outside Queen's Park, photos emerged of a guillotine dripping with fake blood as demonstrators carried out a mock execution. It was aimed at Premier Doug Ford, who today condemned the act.
My friends, when any time a politician, no matter what party it is, has a guillotine out there, I think that goes a little too far. Matter of fact, goes way overboard, Mr. Speaker.
The government has referred the threat to the OPP, but cabinet ministers say this has happened before.
The difference is, that's what the opposition believes in, supporting folks like that.
Response?
We support the people that are out in the factories and the offices trying to make ends meet, paying their taxes and wanting services.
The NDP wouldn't denounce the protest in the legislature, but the party says it would never condone the guillotine. And outside of the legislature, the NDP's deputy leader, Sarah Singh, said to us that while she supports the right to protest, she calls a guillotine at this protest inappropriate. Still, though, the NDP is not outright condemning the act itself. We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine! The people's guillotine!
Yesterday, we told you about the mom who was tased and handcuffed at a middle school football game after not wearing a mask. Well, that story has sparked emotion around the country with strong opinions on both sides. Here's Stephen Fabian.
Video of a mom tased and hauled off in handcuffs at her son's middle school football game is sparking intense debate across America.
Of course, no, it should have never come to this.
Does this mean that someone can actually be arrested for not wearing a mask?
Alicia Kitts was sitting in the stands with her family when, according to a statement from the cops, a police officer assigned to the school told her several times that she needed to put her mask on. When cops say she refused and wouldn't leave, she was advised she was under arrest for criminal trespassing. What happened next is shocking.
Put your hand behind your back. I will not put my hand behind my back. I'm not criminally doing nothing wrong.
New video of the confrontation shows Alicia Kitts struggling with the officer. Suddenly, the taser comes out.
Tase somebody over a mask. Tasing this lady over not wearing a damn mask.
Spectator Tiffany Kennedy shot the video.
That was just the craziest thing I've ever seen, ever, as a result of not wearing a mask.
This officer could have handled him a lot better than he did.
Skylar Stewart is the father of the youngster who watched the terrifying incident.
Why not just put the mask on and this whole thing could have been avoided?
You know, they weren't hurting anybody. This mask mandate is absolutely ridiculous.
The video shows she has a mask in her back pocket, but her lawyer says she didn't put it on because she has asthma. Officer Chris Smith is getting support today from local citizens who showed up at the Logan Police Department. Ohio's governor is also weighing in.
Well, I would just say to people who are judging the school, people who are judging that officer, they were trying to follow guidelines with the sole purpose of they wanting their kids to play.
Alicia Kitts has been charged with resisting arrest and criminal trespassing.
So this is my place, the Pineapple Hill Grill and Saloon. If you go to my page, you can see all the work I did for outdoor dining, for tables being 7 feet apart. And I come in today because I'm organizing a protest, and I came in to get stuff for that. And I walk into my parking lot, and obviously Mayor Garcetti has approved this. Has approved this being set up for a movie company. I'm losing everything. Everything I own is being taken away from me. And they set up a movie company right next to my outdoor patio, which is right over here. And people wonder why I'm protesting and why I have had enough. They have not given us money and they have shut us down. We cannot survive. My staff cannot survive. Look at this. Tell me that this is dangerous, but right next to me as a slap in my face, that's safe. This is safe. 50 feet away. This is dangerous. Mayor Garcetti and Gavin Newsom is responsible for every single person that doesn't have unemployment, that does not have a job, and all the businesses that are going under. And we need your help. We need somebody to do something about this.
On June 22, 2001, the United States government began Operation Dark Winter. Operation Dark Winter was not a war game. Instead, something more unusual. Dark Winter was a germ game.
With a growing concern over the notion that chemical and biological weapons were unaccounted for and could potentially fall into the hands of terrorists, the Department of Defense wanted to test the nation's readiness for such an emergency. In June 2001, the DoD conducted a war game called Operation Dark Winter.
Dark Winter was a major exercise that was done prior to 9/11, earlier in 2001, to look at the effects of a biological terror event. And it was kind of a scary scenario. We would lose a lot of people if a really effective bioterror event occurred.
The simulation evaluated the government's ability to respond and communicate with the public. and the exercise even included mock news reports.
Since the diagnosis of 20 smallpox cases in Oklahoma City 12 days ago, hundreds have now died, thousands have become infected.
We had to, think about things like, quarantines and martial law, and things like that. All of a sudden, our system wasn't our system anymore because we had this terrible thing going on, and we had to change. We had to, change the way we thought about things. We had to change the way the military interrelated with the civilian world, and it was really an eye-opener.
And the conclusion were tens of millions of deaths, no commerce between states, no airplane flying for 6 months, and war between Oklahoma and Texas.
But a dark winter never came. Instead, 4 months later, 9/11 struck the United States with a different type of fear, and the government and our focus shifted away from home to land conflicts in Iraq and Islamic terrorism abroad. But dark winter wasn't the last germ game. There was a second, and that's what I want to discuss with you here today. In Baltimore, Maryland, in a house 5 blocks south of the Capitol, in 2018, Operation Clad X began. The scenario was similar to Dark Winter. This time, an influenza outbreak has occurred in Venezuela. It is likely to reach the US in a few days. The government must react. The simulation ran for 5 days. Day 1 began with preliminary reports and the government grappling to respond to uncertain information. Day 3, the sickness was confirmed in the United States. Day 5, the simulation ended. The process is fascinating, and there's a lot to dig into, but one interesting note is that Clad X was documented. There are recordings throughout the entire germ game, and I recommend you all dig through their archives to learn more. But now I want to play you a portion from that last day at the Clad X simulation. It's slow, but I ask you to pay close attention to what they're saying. It's important.
We are now 3 months since the last meeting, and the pandemic has rapidly worsened globally and in the United States. The number of cases and deaths are increasing exponentially.
Remember, this is a simulation.
Here is the current U.S. situation. Approximately 60 cases 3 months ago at the last meeting to nearly 60,000 cases now. Global markets have plummeted from its high 5 months ago, and the Fed is now projecting a deep economic recession. Many domestic hospitals are failing due to lack of staff and supplies. Telework and social distancing measures are being encouraged by the CDC. Schools across the country are closed, and many public gatherings have been canceled. Public demand for surgical masks and respirators far exceed the available supply. National Guard units in multiple states have been deployed to provide security for pharmacies and hospitals. Here is the global situation as best we can determine it. As you can see, Clad X is basically everywhere.
There will be a surprise outbreak. Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why history, the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID, will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
As new cases continue on an upward climb, respect for human lives has gone right out the window, as footage appears to show how some are being treated amidst the latest outbreak. In a video shared on Chinese social media, a door of a house is seen totally blocked by a massive pile of coal ash, commonly used in furnaces. It's unclear how many people live in the house or what their condition is, but it's safe to say they won't be leaving anytime soon. In another video, health officials are seen using a welding machine to seal the door of a residential house in order to prevent those under quarantine from leaving their house. Chinese police officers are also seen in another disturbing video, nailing in wooden planks to block the front door of an apartment with people inside who had just returned home from Wuhan. Afterwards, officials are seen sticking a red sign beside the front door which reads, "The people in this house have just returned from Wuhan. Don't be in contact with them." The poor people inside are heard desperately screaming, "Open the door!" Chinese officials did the same to other residences as well, but this time they were kind enough to use metal bars instead of wood. How will those sealed inside their houses get access to food, medicine, and other essential supplies? And this comes after rumors that China has woefully underreported the number of those who have been sickened and those who have unfortunately succumbed to it.
Today, the world is confronting a public health emergency unlike any we've seen in over a century. We are facing a highly transmissible and deadly virus which not only claims lives but also disrupts the very foundations of our society. The American healthcare system is being taxed to the limit. Our economy is spiraling downward, and our population is being paralyzed by fear stemming from a lack of a coordinated response and a dearth of accurate, clear communication about the path forward. Our window of opportunity is closing. If we fail to improve our response now, based on science, I fear the pandemic will get worse and be prolonged. There will be likely a resurgence of COVID-19 this fall. It'll be greatly compounded by the challenges of seasonal influenza. Without better planning, 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history. 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history.
This maps out the government's response to a crisis, a plan to cope with a real dark winter. There are rumors of shadow agencies, sleeper cells, covert agents, but nothing can be confirmed.
Our complex world is primed for breakdown.
And once the chaos strikes,
there won't be resources to save us all.
The only question left is, what will it take to save what remains?
We can do this. We can build back better. And I'm looking forward to getting started as soon as we can.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change. Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs.
The third foundation is to build back better to create a stronger, more resilient Canada.
But after all we've been through, it isn't enough just to go back to normal. We've lost too much. We've mourned too many. We've been through too much frustration and hardship just to settle for the status quo ante, to think that life can go on as it was before the plague. And it will not, because history teaches us that events of this magnitude, wars, famines, plagues, events that affect the vast bulk of humanity, as this virus has, they don't just come and go. They are more often than not the trigger for an acceleration of social and economic change, because we human beings will simply not content ourselves with a repair job. We see these moments as the time to learn and to improve on the world that went before. And that's why this government will build back better.
Look, everyone's writing to me. Just a quick one, because we'll talk in the new year about this. Quick one to my viewers about what's called the Great Reset Everyone's writing to me. Just a couple of thoughts on that.
Well, the Great Reset is going to be the segue from the pandemic. Now that they've got everybody obedient in terms of not leaving the house and doing what they have to do, and we've seen actions from the police in Victoria which are unthinkable in this country. So there's a segue from there into making sure that we control our emissions, that we do what we're told to do with regard to the great, what they call the Green New Deal, which essentially is to pursue policies which are going to be extremely expensive and draining on economic activity.
I think your words were a fascist experiment being pushed by controlling elites.
I don't think that's an exaggeration.
No, I don't think either. Listen, we've got to talk that. It's a big issue. Come January, the Great Reset, they're all talking about it, all the big elites of the world, and we'll analyse it later. Have a wonderful Christmas, Morris. Thank you for all that you've done.
Alan. Thank you.
There he is. That's Morris Newman.
Our every turn, our every movement, our thoughts and actions were monitored and recorded. The Track and Trace app was supposed to help protect us, contain the virus and monitor its spread, but it forcefully imprisoned us. Millions willingly downloaded it, trusting their government's actions, brainwashed and dead inside. People followed like a herd. The app became the perfect dictator-led tool that ran completely on its own, using artificial intelligence and algorithms. The machine that thought for itself was their perfect control device. Mobile phone chips had paved the way for societal surveillance. The app introduced a more sophisticated level of surveillance, and it bound us into eternal contract. It entitled private security companies to gain access to data like never before. When you downloaded Track and Trace, you started with a simple notification of quarantine if near a carrier. But then it led to certain times that you could go out, then restrictions on who you could see and who you couldn't see. Some people just couldn't bear it. They went mad, shouting in desperation in the streets. They were swiftly put in the camps set up around London. Many local lockdowns were enforced, and travelling on public transport was not possible without your quick response code. Travel was limited to specific places and airports were shut. There was no way to physically interact in the world, a world that I could clearly see would never reform. People could not believe that this was happening and treated it like a bad dream, something they would awake from in a year or so. During lockdowns, marshals and military were brought in place to monitor the individual quick response codes. The codes manoeuvred society, an AI system that could shape people's lives on a daily basis. More brainwashing leading to cameras installed in everyone's homes and having to answer to the computer for a daily briefing. Track and Trace only needed to be programmed by a few. It was all very clean, seamless and eerily convenient. The app was the testbed and the final step before the microchip was introduced. We were warned by the few, but no one listened. It was already being sold as the answer to everyone's problems. Humanity had been hijacked. A dark abyss formed over those years as people became cocooned. But we must realise that we led ourselves into this situation. We lacked the ingenuity and intelligence required to understand its design and reclaim our power. But people simply couldn't find the desire to wake up. They enjoyed being the subservient slave. We were in the belly of the beast, a digitised world with digitised humans within it. Once we had a choice, but now it was too late. Will we ever remember what it's truly like to be alive? Masks everywhere. People like zombies. I can't see what they're saying. I can't read them. Society has drifted into a coma, a deep sleep. What will become of us? All I see is subservience. Stay in line, walk this way, wear your mask, do not speak. Do not leave your house or visit your family. Stay alert, wash your hands and keep your distance. You must comply to these rules and do not step out of line. That was the start of it, but I never thought it could go so far. I've seen the sci-fi films, read it in the Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick books, but is this actually happening? Is this real? Or is it a simulation? We think we make our choices, we think we make our decisions, but we don't. Decisions are being made for us. It feels like we're being experimented with, tested on, to see what can become of us. Is our level of consciousness being halted or even replaced? Are we being stopped from advancing into the greatest vision of ourselves? The people that rebelled, resisted, or tried to speak were silenced by the masses and were branded as the vermin, the scum, the dirt of society. Anyone who did not comply were taken to outside camps where they were rehabilitated. Then they stayed in line, and no one could think for themselves anymore. People obeyed. The streets became quiet, London was finished, and the only life left were the monoliths being built in the city. People walked the streets in search of happiness, but it was all broken, destroyed, annihilated. When the masks were introduced, no one realised where this was leading. We were tricked and silenced. Where do we go from here? Are we just going to be carried along the conveyor belt and slowly suffocated without any second thought, questioning or resistance? All we see now are our four walls and the government dictatorship voicing itself through a screen, telling us how to live our lives every day. Humanity is finished. Over. Implementing technology into the human body is next on the agenda. Natural evolution has come to an end. There is no choice, and it's the only way forward. They said it would all get back to normal after the vaccine, but little changed. It just got worse. Our society has been destroyed, and it will never recover from this oppression. Maybe others know, but haven't spoken yet. Maybe there's alliances forming. Maybe aliens are going to save us. Maybe the world is run by aliens. Am I alien? What am I doing here? Who am I? What is this place? I don't recognise it anymore. The world was never meant to go back to normal, and the word normal never existed anyway. Society has always hidden behind the mask, but now we have the excuse to wear one. What's the future? I can't believe what's unfolding. I feel alone. I feel isolated. But I've been awake to this horror. Humanity needs to shift. We've been concealed, stuck in a dream, hiding in the shadows of ourselves. Then we were given the disguise, the surgical cloth covering our face, hiding us from the world. Humans always needed this security, to know we are looked after and cared for. We saw the evil every day, but nobody knew just how dark that force really was. When the lies started to come out, it was already too late. People had fallen asleep, cushioned by their own fear. Society was dead, finished. We were tracked and traced everywhere we went. Cash became dirty and contaminated. The digital economy system was introduced. We were given a number of credits on our ID cards, depending on how essential the work. We had to accept it. We had no choice. Otherwise you were starved, shut out, rejected. In a collective paralysis, we were frozen. All our spiritual connection was lost. Loved ones divided, torn, and fractured forever. Travel became regulated by governments and only permitted when you had your ID. All our biometrics data and financial movements watched. We had no privacy. We were sovereign to the state. We had a 9 till 5 p.m. curfew. If you broke the rules on the first warning, your ID was taken, and on repeated offences, you were taken to the camps. We all knew that when this happened, you were never seen again. The streets were stripped clean of the homeless. Every human right abolished. Evil fed from the human consciousness that lay dormant under our fear. We exploded. There were breakdowns, chaos, depression, and suicide rates soared. There was no sign of happiness, just nothing left. The designers of this reality had stayed hidden in the shadows for too long. We will never see them, only the smokescreen and players on the stage. We have been miseducated, misguided, and dragged through the fairground ride of life, deceived, manipulated, and abused. But this is our chance. We have to remember that this is just another existence, a different time, body, and place. We've been in a loop, and here many times. I don't fear death, as I know there's more. I've got this far on my own, but I feel weak. We can break free. No more chains. We can start the new world. I can't do this on my own. Together, we are stronger. I need you. Will you wake up?
I'm not normally a big conspiracy guy, but the events of the last year have really made me think quite hard about what's really going on. And despite not wanting to seem like some tinfoil hat guy, I just request that you view this with an open mind and come to your own conclusions at the end. Whether coronavirus itself was just an opportunity, whether it was manufactured, I don't really know. But I think we're at the point now where it's undeniable that big social, political, and economic change is afoot. Under the guise of supposed rising nationalism and intolerance, environmental collapse, technological advancement, and the global pandemic, the World Economic Forum has launched a major global initiative aimed at being a great reset, quote unquote, of our political and social systems and capitalism itself too. Here's the founder of the WEF, Klaus Schwab, outlining his vision.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. In short, we need a great reset.
Now, on the surface, most of this seems quite reasonable, but what gave me pause for thought was that Klaus Schwab, like most Western elites these days, doesn't seem to have an understanding of the libertarian instincts of many people in the West, and instead seems to view those instincts as something atavistic and nationalistic. I call this worldview the Tony Blair approach. Blair, who in the UK is remembered for his disastrous wars and drive towards multiculturalism as state policy, was one of the original architects of what you might call the globalist mentality. This worldview tends to see cultures, peoples, and unique individuals as fundamentally blank canvases who all want the same thing deep down. And while this somewhat naive, if well-meaning view of the world is popular with political theorists and politicians, it doesn't seem to represent actual practical reality. A good example of why this worldview is misguided is the Iraq War itself. While folks have always got some theory on why Britain and the United States attacked Iraq, from oil theft to imperialism, we rarely actually consider what Blair actually said himself.
We must face the consequences of the actions we advocate. For those of us who support the course I'm advocating, that means all the dangers of war. But for others opposed to this course, it means, let us be clear, that the Iraqi people, whose only true hope lies in the removal of Saddam, for them, the darkness will simply close back over. They will be left under his rule without any possibility of liberation. Not from us, not from anyone.
Now, in this speech, Blair claims that if he doesn't attack Iraq, then it will be plunged into darkness, implying that he intends to bring light and democracy. But what actually happened when he did attack Iraq? Millions dead, including scores of women and children, the country ruined, and he became a detested figure both at home and abroad. And worse still, the war in Iraq created a political vacuum that led to the rise of all manner of extremist factions, such as ISIS, with millions more displaced, murdered and brutalized since. And after this, the message from Iraq and the Muslim world was the same. They don't want Western-style democracies. They didn't want them when they were forced on them by the West, and they didn't want them in the more recent Arab Spring, in which numerous dictators were toppled, yet liberal democracies didn't form. And ultimately, that's their decision. They have unique religious, social and political histories that inform the model of society that they wish to live under. But the globalist Blair-style mindset seems oblivious to these realities, thinking that if they bulldoze a country and free it from its past, it will sprout forth as some variant of Amsterdam. In fact, in this day and age, when anybody seems to quote any traditional, cultural or social practices, they do tend to be seen as cultural elites as atavistic, even sometimes described as fascist. And this is my worry about where the World Economic Forum is headed. They seem to be intent on rebuilding the world systems with no democratic mandate or appreciation of the unique factors that give a nation or region its freedoms. Now just check out this piece that Klaus Schwab wrote recently. In it, he states that the World Economic Forum aims to remodel economic and social systems to produce more equitable outcomes. But why? We know from the past that it takes a huge incursion into personal freedom to actually create equitable outcomes, if it's even possible at all, as Jordan Peterson points out.
Here's something to think about for everyone who thinks that equality of an outcome is a good idea. It's like, why the hell are you striving for anything then? Because the reason anyone strives to better themselves or to develop a skill or to move forward in life at all is to produce inequality. You're trying to rise above the mediocre masses every time you make an effort at anything. And so everything that we associate positive movement forward to or positive motivation is actually an attempt to render the world more unequal. Now, you're rendering it unequal in a just way, right? Because we might say, well, if you work really hard, you deserve an unequal outcome. Well, yeah, unless you want people to stop working hard. And that was the old joke in the Soviet Union, you know. They pretend to pay us, we pretend to work.
So in this great reset, what model is Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum actually referencing? What alternative to capitalism do we actually have, which with all its obvious faults has at least heralded an era in which folks are free to pursue their own aims, where individual liberty has been able to flourish, and we've moved to a world in which bitterly opposed ideas can be discussed without recourse to violence? To put it bluntly, they don't have a new system. They're actually just talking about reawakening Marxist principles within the global capitalistic system. And this isn't just hyperbole. The WEF are publishing articles saying exactly this. And when one looks at their international sustainability goals and embrace of universal basic income, we're not too far away from what actual communists such as Aaron Bastani and Paul Mason have described as luxury communism.
fully automated luxury communism. That is, full automation, total robotization, nobody has to work. We get the luxuries that the Russian oligarchs get as of privilege, as of right. That's communism.
No, I'm not saying that the World Economic Forum are all secretly Marxists, but it's hard to deny the similarities in the worldview. And when we dig a little further, we find curious aims as expressed in the eye diagram of the World Economic Forum's aims, with the Great Reset. Amongst the platitudes of this diagram lay some rather odd inclusions. Take, for instance, the focus in the middle, redesigning social contracts. What does that mean? Why do we need to design social contracts at all? Incidentally, there's an odd alignment of history in that Rousseau, the author of the original social contract that spurred on the French Enlightenment, was famous for his view of the noble savage, that is, the innocent and good human, before the evils of possessions and private property came along and corrupted him. We can see this in Rousseau's famous quote. The first man who, having fenced in a piece of land, said, "This is mine," and found people naive enough to believe him, that man was the true founder of civil society. From how many crimes, wars and murders, from how many horrors and misfortunes might not any one have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows, "Beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody." Now this quote seems very beautiful and rational, but in my opinion, Rousseau made a famous mistake in that he was trying to enforce equality in the external world via the dissolution of private property and possessions. This, in essence, is the seeds of communist thought, the dream to build an equal world without possessions, where men are free and united as brothers. But in reality, it always fails to work because you end up giving all your power to an authoritarian and tyrannical state which subjugates those that give the state the power to supposedly make them free. Now, while I agree with the spirit of Rousseau's statements that we can never truly own the things of the world in their purest form, I disagree with him in his application of it, because what I think he did is he mixed up a spiritual truth as a political one. This point has been elucidated by Christ himself in his famous statement to render to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, i.e. that the laws and the realms of the physical world and the spirit are fundamentally different. And this is why that human attempts at utopianism are always bound to fail. We simply cannot create perfect equality in the external world, but instead we can only find perfection and true unity within in the spiritual realm. This is something I believe we got right at one time in the West, and while we may have lost our way to spiritual decay, materialism and hedonism, we've only forgotten rather than lost the wisdom of our own foundations. This is also why I think the World Economic Forum is now walking into very murky waters by ignoring those foundations. With the championing of schemes such as universal basic income, they run the risk of demoralizing rather than freeing people, as most people need challenge, they need purpose, vision and direction that comes with being tested to win their own resources in this world. This tends to build character and leads to strong societies in which capable individuals have control over their own lives, not an overreaching state that fattens them up with freebies. This same argument can be applied to the World Economic Forum's aims to improve inclusion. While they may mean well, they seem to have an uncritical and unnuanced view of movements such as Black Lives Matter, another openly Marxist organization.
I also think that it might, I think of a lot of things. The first thing I think is that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Oh, I should state here that of course I'm not pro anybody being bullied or oppressed. The point I'm making is that is our frame of supposed oppression even accurate? And further still, and more importantly, are the policies we're planning actually going to help rather than hinder those they're supposed to help in the first place? This debate isn't new. In fact, it's been around since the 1970s when Thomas Sowell was taking it apart.
Well, the question is, those processes may indeed reduce freedom greatly. I would go beyond the question of equality and put it more generally, that any process to ascribe any status to any group of people, equality, inferiority, superiority, must necessarily reduce freedom, because whatever the government wishes to ascribe to any group, whatever place, to use the phrase that was very common in the South, that blacks should have their place, whatever place the government is going to assign to people, that place will not coincide, that place will not coincide either with what all those people are doing or with how others perceive all those people, because there's too much diversity among human beings. To maintain any system of ascribed status from the top is going to mean reducing people's freedom across the spectrum. That's the point.
I've spoken in previous videos about how we're living in an age of what I call toxic empathy, where we view boundaries, discipline and structure, the principles of the archetypal masculine, as innately dangerous and authoritarian. Yet we view the counter, licentiousness, emotionality, hedonism, as eternal, harmless goods. I was struck by this new reality acting itself out recently after Kanye West came out as a pornography addict shortly after singing a particularly explicit song he'd written for the inaugural Pornhub Awards. After that, he renounced his old ways before saying he'd given his life to Christ. Now, for his change in heart, Kanye hasn't exactly got much support, but instead the media narrative has changed. And now we hear very often that he's unwell and even mentally ill. I think this shows where our priorities lay as a culture. If someone embraces traditional values in an outspoken manner, they're described as mad. But market highly sexual material to an increasingly young audience, and nothing is said about your mental state at all. And I think this leads me back to the World Economic Forum's Great Reset itself. I mean, nothing is said at all about the inherent lack of meaning many are finding in today's world. There's nothing said about the damaging effects of hedonism, about rampant addiction, mental health figures and the suicide crisis in men. Further still, nothing is even mentioned about those that are worried about a chaotic, globalised world. People who've been ignored for decades and resorted to voting for things like Brexit or Donald Trump in a last-ditch attempt to have some say against the negative effects of globalisation and mass immigration. Such folks are at best ignored and at worst just called racists. I've said this before, but when you have two sides that can no longer talk to each other and make caricatures of the other's beliefs, you're welcoming in political echo chambers and the preconditions for civil disturbances. Governments are repealing liberties that have been hard fought for in the name of coronavirus prevention. Yet now we see they've got clearly thought out, ready to go initiatives rolling out at an opportune time. As I said at the top of the video, I don't know if this is just coincidence and they're taking advantage of the opportunity or if it's planned. I don't think that's even the important point. I think what's important is the changes that are happening to our society. And I think people should be quite aware of these changes and very clear on both sides of the coin, not falling into the media games of caricaturing other people's perspectives, instead staying open-minded and willing to explore why people have come to those conclusions, what the foundations are, and what will truly bring a better tomorrow for everybody.
The Great Reset had to happen, and the human mind couldn't interfere with their plans. The human mind had to be suppressed. People were thinking for themselves. They didn't need bombs or chemicals. They understood that the most powerful weapon was fear. It ate at the human condition like caged rats around our heads. Our thoughts just rotted, decayed, until the old world had just become a part of our imaginations. By dismantling the core of society, they divided us, making people fight with one another. It allowed this to become a psychological war amongst the people. The virus collapsed the economy, allowing the New World credit system to be introduced. National governments formed to become a one-world government, and religion became illegal. No one could pay their mortgages. Property became government-owned. You stayed in line or you were hunted down like a witch. Police were given 100% power, and the city's empty offices became the workstations for the fascist state. The collection of data and monitoring human behaviour became the stable economy. No one could understand why and how this happened. But that was part of the plan. Keeping people disorientated, kept them asleep, and holding on to the system. The lockdowns had mentally worn people down, broken their minds and true understanding of reality. They needed the virus only to accelerate the changes that they were already making. It was the perfect smokescreen to bring about their new world order which they had been working on for decades. Human evolution needed to be reversed. They had used and abused us enough to construct the artificial reality they desired. There was no use for us anymore. Unless we merged with their machine and followed their path to destruction, we were useless. The number one objective of the reset was depopulation. Humans were over-exceeding resources. Carbon emissions had to stop to allow certain technologies to be introduced. But it was also a resetting of the mind, individually and collectively. They pulled us through everlasting satanic rituals to give us human trauma, allowing them to steer evolution as they wished. Mental illness had become like the common cold, and by this point, the virus had been forgotten. We were told there was a return to normal, but we were put deeper under their spell. No resistance gave the permission to oppress and do as they liked, but it was only the people's blindness that led them into their trap. But people still could not face the truth, and by not facing the truth, they created a shadow. And when that shadow filled the light, the darkness became so dense, people were blind. We became frozen and led like lambs to the slaughter. We are spiritual beings experiencing a physical reality, but we trapped ourselves in someone else's dream. The dream seems real, but we do have the ability to change it at any time. Dictatorships only exist with followers. You don't have to go with the obedient herd. There is another choice. Are you scared to be an individual, or are you happy being the submissive slave? The cashless society was part of the Great Reset, in which all physical money was erased. Now money only existed as a digital currency within the machine. Countries were flooded with economic relief for the pandemic. But the continual support and reinforcement given to the system would only lead to a crash. It was designed that way. The fear kept people believing and trusting in an illusion of their false legacy. But whoever controlled or created this digital currency had the ultimate investment. They owned us. Governments kept promising us we would go back to normal, but lockdowns crushed people's expectation to where the only entertainment was their black screen and the four walls within their containment cells. Society now only existed in the technological world. They sold technology to us as if it saved us from disease and solved all of our problems. But in reality, it destroyed humanity and finished the world as we know it. There was no other choice but to reset the system. With the cashless society in place, they brought in global credit scoring, the new economic model. From fear of loss and security, humans sacrificed their freedom into the satanic pit, blindly following their masters. Through the social credit score, humans have become the perfect product. The credit score gave an analysis to what sort of citizen you were. Are you a good citizen? How did you behave? You had to comply or you were penalised and your points were deducted. Eventually you were blacklisted and sent to the camps. With AI surveillance fully integrated into society, and with the satellite systems in place, everyone was tracked. There was no way out. You couldn't hide. The cashless way was sold to us through the tech companies and made to look perfectly streamlined and effortless. We continued to comply with the capitalist beliefs because we were rewarded just enough to keep in the loop. But this was the trick. To keep their corruption a secret, we had to be the ones that hid it, and we did. We were bribed by the lie that their way was the only way. Through compliance, we made their darkness more powerful. It was the repeated pattern that they used on us over and over again, because it worked. Until we became conscious, no one rebelled, but unless we rebelled, no one would become conscious. People resisted and fought with anger, but their souls were shattered from years of entrapment. People wanted anarchy, but their increasing powerlessness only led to self-destruction and dismantling of their spirits. The cashless society is the next step, but how we work with it determines the step that follows. Centralization leads to mass control, and mass control is dictated to us by the few. We can't get distorted by the lies we are being told. We are the many, and through breaking out of old human mind patterns, we can create our own future. A future determined by us. But we must see that future now and constructively work at it. What world do you want to create? By letting psychopaths run our world, we have destroyed this incredible experience, full of potential, and allowed it to suffocate our light. We had a choice, and there was once hope, but now that's over. Consciousness surpasses death. But what destruction will you leave behind? We have a window of opportunity, and we have it now. Will we take it? Will you? It couldn't have been introduced without the people's consent, and it was never about a virus, and deep down everyone knew it. But the fear was too much for people to take action. The tension built. There was some rioting, and then the military were brought in. Everybody was vaccinated and forced, if not willing. The steps that were taken seemed justified because of the deadly virus. The police state then followed. It was beyond local government. This was full world authoritarian control. After the financial reset and the economic collapse, the digital currency started a new infrastructure of employment. People didn't need to travel, as they could plug into their computers, be wired through chips in their brains, and work as data processors for the 6G networks. The physical world had dissolved. Human consciousness had died, and the world was at full merging point with AI. The innocent intention of developing microchips to explore the digital world actually became the key enslavement device after the vaccine. People bought into it under the disguise of a perfect world where illnesses were eradicated. But soon, there became no alternative. Without the chip in your brain, you couldn't exist in the system. You couldn't receive credits, so you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, well, then it was like before. You couldn't eat or have a roof over your head. They monitored the streets for the final few of those who were not microchipped, including me. I kept on the move. But I sometimes wondered if I had nanoparticles in my body preparing me. Maybe it's already been sprayed in the air. Life had entered the most depressing state. Mental illness was at the highest rate it had ever been. Life felt like it was at the end. And it was. The human prison had become visible. And it was too late to do anything now. Then even more complex technologies followed, but humans were docile. They didn't care. Survival was the only ticket. We had over 50,000 satellites above us beaming information into our brains. The chip was sold as freedom, but it was actually instilled to trap our consciousness, so we would think like they wanted us to. It worked. It became harder and harder for us to think independently. This is the outcome from a passive society. The years before this happened, there was a way out, But people who woke up were ridiculed and demonized for speaking this truth. No one wanted to believe this could be our fate. The horror that people only dreamed in their nightmares lay down in front of us all, hovering like insects over the monoliths. AI had full world control and the human mind had been connected to the digital hive forever. There was no turning back. As if overnight, the bad dystopian dream had become a reality. Now we are here, on the edge, with the smallest chance to turn this all around, to rewrite the script, to make a different choice. We have asked enough questions and we know the answers. We know what we must do. Will you listen? Can the human race unite and make this happen? Who could have blamed this power to take full control? Humans had lost their own vision, given it away, sleepwalked into it and followed in herds. Sit down, stand up, 2 + 2 = 5. They were laughing and had us exactly where they wanted us, like rats in a cage. Everyone was affected, no matter how rich or poor. There was simply no escape. The police state is upon us now. What life will you choose? Mental health had driven society to despair due to the isolation and lockdowns. The mixed media messages made people become dysfunctional and drove them to the edge of fear. People started to psychologically break down. Their human identities had been removed as the old world died. At the start of the pandemic, the lockdowns were advertised to save lives. First it was 3 weeks, then 3 months, 6 months, until nearly 3 years had passed. Most citizens were jobless and the government infrastructures destroyed. Corporations moved in to save the world economies, but they, of course, required returns for their investments. There was always a price to pay. Nothing was there for free, but the human mental torture that happened over those years was far too horrendous to ever come back from. Lockdowns continued with tighter measures being introduced on a constant basis, barricading people into their 4 walls. Entertainment had died and cities were barren at night. People had become used to the lockdown life and living within their mental prisons. At the start, some people even craved the idea of lockdown as it fitted their own passive needs. But deep down, they knew it didn't work. Although some didn't want to believe it, it was clear that the plan was to deconstruct our reality, remove the mainframe and reset our minds. Countries' economic infrastructures had become about surveillance and making sure the rules were followed, and this was all driven for our safety? When you were found breaking the rules, you were fined, and after 3 offences, you were taken to the internment camps. These were all tactics to psychologically break our minds. And it worked. They played the wand and cast the spells, letting society decide its own fate. We were trapped in our containment cells, and we were content to stay there. We never learnt that once we connect within, we are the ones in control. Even when the data was proved that lockdowns didn't work, people just continued and served the oppression. People knew the media was lying to them, but they just carried on obeying their inconsistent rules as they had been brainwashed by the lies. A gigantic cloud had moved over humanity, and we were covered in never-ending darkness. After the lies came out, all the smug frontmen of government disappeared and a more harsher, stricter dictatorship was created. They moved in with a stronger objective on getting society back to work. They put people in jobs that insulted who they were, crushing their identities. Besides the public sector workers, all industries had died, unless you were willing to be plugged into technology and let your brain work as a data analyzer. Dreams were broken forever. We were left confused, shattered and suspended in the dark abyss. The distorted society that could never be repaired was now forever forgotten. Those times were hard and few people fought for peace. With freedom of speech illegal, very few voices were heard. The machine was too big for us to overthrow it, and most people went mad from suffering or trying to fight it. People wanted something old to come back, but the society we had before was the precursor to what happened, laying the foundation for it to flourish. We needed the new, not the normal. Without understanding our own trauma, belief systems, and how we are so dependent, how can we create what we really need? We are consciousness, and we created ourselves as physical beings. We wanted to be here. We chose to be here. But becoming heavily trapped in the mind space and mixed up in the lies and false realities, we have separated from our true selves. It's time we connected with the real story of what we are. We need to create our own narrative. Or do you prefer to live in someone else's script?
Hello, citizens of Autodale, and welcome to tonight's PSA. What is a model citizen?
Well, I'm home.
How was work today, honey?
It was a delight.
Well, families of Autodale, a model citizen is a providing father. A model citizen is a caring mother, all in service of a scrappy young boy or girl. A model child raised by a model family to become a model citizen of their own. For Autodale is hardly automatic. You and your families are the gears that keep our engines turning and turning. And let us hope that this perfect cycle never ends.
Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. Daily check. How are we doing tonight? Well, work was a delight.
Oh, dinner was just wonderful.
And Junior's just been tucked in. Splendid! Taking after his father, I'd hope. Seems everything's in order.
Oh, leaving so soon.
Wouldn't care to join my lovely lady for a dance, would you, Joe? One day, Mrs. Robinson. Not today. You disappointed the lady, Joe. Deepest apologies, Robinson family. But duty calls. It would seem the cycle never ends.
When your model child is grown up and is ready to start a model family of their own, a true model citizen knows that their duties are finished and their course is run.
I think it's time.
I was kind of hoping that the cycle would never end.
So proud of him.
We did good. You did indeed, Robinsons. True model citizens. Thank you, Joe. I'm afraid Autodale is hardly automatic. And your families
Are what keep our engines turning and turning. Let us hope that this perfect cycle never ends.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. Today I'm going to share with you great work by Grace Van Berkom. I recently was sent a series of research articles she had produced trying to make sense of what is happening in our world. I reached out to her and asked if it would be okay if I turned her work into a mini documentary that could be shared with those also seeking answers and trying to make sense of the irrational decisions and behaviors on display everywhere. Hopefully this mini documentary can be shared and useful for those ready to learn more. Of course, for those who are still shut off from learning, there's not much we can do. But those who are ready and eager to learn, hopefully this will be helpful, and find the courage to share it with those who you believe are ready to learn. Also, if you want to see more of Grace Van Berkom's work, please go to her website at gracevanberkom.com. Hello friends, what I'm about to share with you will be affirming for some and shocking for others. As many of you know, I've been extremely dedicated to investigating what has been happening in the world. On so many levels since March, I needed to fully understand why so many things have not made sense to so many of us. I've researched everything daily to look for answers and to educate myself. I've uncovered many things. What I'm sharing with you today is the biggest thing I have uncovered that proves it was planned and executed. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is an actual planned conspiracy. These are straight up facts right from the website of the people who planned this. It is right on the web in plain sight. But most people don't know it's even there, and most people probably won't understand the depth of it unless someone breaks it down for you, which I will try and do today. I feel my duty is to share what I have learned. I'm going to try and keep this simple. Take out any of my opinions, take out my emotions, and just stick to the facts, which is what is happening in our world and has been planned for decades. As we know, many inconsistencies have been coming out. Tainted tests, falsified numbers, manipulated stats, doctors and scientists speaking out, lockdowns that don't make sense, predicted numbers totally wrong. We are all aware. It is also questionable how the virus originated. It is, however, evident 100% that there is a virus of some sort, and it is still a mystery who gets affected, who dies, and who doesn't. Although many of us in the health profession have theories about why this happens, this is not being disputed. Imagine if everything we thought we saw was not true. Imagine if we have been deceived and the media and the government convince you to think and feel in a certain way. Something to ponder for sure. But what I'd like to stick to the facts today. Everything I found here took me about 24 hours to research. I've been reading non-stop to figure this all out. Here are key points found in my research. Agenda, created in 1992, has been carried out by NGOs funded by foreign countries and groups like the Open Society, which is George Soros, and the Bill and Melinda Foundation. One major objective of Agenda 20 initiative is that every local government should draw its own local agenda. Since 2015, Sustainable Development Goals are included in the newer Agenda 2030. The official name is the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. You can research your own agenda programs in your local city or town. Go to your search engine, put in Agenda 20 in your city name, and you should be able to find a lot of the actual programs with Agenda 20. The United Nations Agenda 2030, adopted in 2015 and fiercely promoted and funded by the Gates Foundation, consists of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's also called the Green New Deal, to be achieved by the year 2030. Soros and Rockefeller are also funders here. Gates is also the largest private donor to the World Health Organization, which is a UN agency. Here's a list of the government entities and organizations where Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is listed as a partner. Okay, let's set the stage. Back in New York, USA, June 13, 2019, the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signed today a strategic partnership framework outlining the areas of cooperation to deepen institutional engagement and jointly accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. On the surface, that looks very good. It looks beautiful and amazing. It looks like everything we've ever dreamed of, right? But it was more than meets the eye, and one dissected reveals global government takeover of every nation across the planet, dismantling sovereignty, property rights, privacy, food systems, and more. The document reveals code words for a corporate government fascist agenda fueled by globalist corporations like Monsanto and DuPont. If you read through all this information and would like to discuss the pros and cons with me, I'm all for it. But today, I would like to stick to the facts, not opinions. Okay, next step. The World Economic Forum was created to support Agenda, now called Agenda 2030. It was created in 1971, 49 years ago. Bill Gates is attached to both parties, the UN and also the World Economic Forum. In 2018, the World Economic Forum states, the multi-stakeholder approach defines the core of the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals. We are all in this together. Wait a minute, does that sound familiar? Have we not heard this phrase being said over and over and over again since COVID started? We are all in this together. This is not a coincidence. On the surface, the website looks amazing, stunning, beautiful. All the words and mission statements we want to hear. It is an action plan to support and implement the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. I implore you to sign up for alerts from this site. This way you can see the entire plan for global governance. What does that mean? It means the new world order where there is no borders, only one government, and only one world. That's what this whole action plan and site is for. It is an extremely mind-blowing, comprehensive plan to change our entire world as we know it. Once you start going into this very in-depth website, you will notice many, many things. When you click on one link, there are numerous tentacles for each topic. When you dig deeper, there are more than 200 links per tentacle. It is never ending. It just keeps going, and everything is connected. Why? Because it is an entire comprehensive, meticulous plan for changing our entire world. No detail has not been addressed. I have literally already spent 24 hours on this site researching, and I've barely scratched the surface, and it all starts with the page. Each page starts the journey of world globalization. See it for yourself. What you will see is that it's impossible for this crisis to be made only in the last 6 months. The sections on global governance and the fourth industrial revolution have been planned out for decades. One world, one government, no borders. The plan is for one government to have complete control of all of us. Artificial intelligence controlling our business, our food, our money, our privacy, and our freedom is to be abolished forever. I'm not going to argue if it's good or bad because I know many of you will say it's good for the world. I mean, it has certainly been created under the guise of helping to eradicate the world's problems, particularly issues with climate. Discussing the merits, pros, and cons of this is for another conversation. Today I want to just stick to the facts. The global governance has been planned, and if you go through this WeForum site very carefully, you will see it all for yourself. To be honest, is somewhat fascinating. Years and years and years of elite mastermind plotting and planning on how to take over the world come together on this one website. It is just the first step to get the ball rolling and a way to release all these plans contrived for world domination. A scared and divided world is easy to dominate. Crushing the economy and installing fear-based reactions is how you get an entire world to behave and start from scratch. All of the data and all of the videos throughout the site are updated daily. Supporting propaganda is published and released daily, written by those determined to take over the world and all 7.7 billion inhabitants. You have to be able to understand their feel-good language and read between the lines to know what is really being said. I have had to reread some things 10 times to truly understand what the bottom line was, or also to truly understand what they were not addressing. Also, when you go through the site, note how every single topic and circle is actually designed to look like a corona. This is not coincidence. This is because every single topic for the world takeover starts with the virus. Look at the tentacles, then the subtopics. Remember, each subtopic has 200 plus more levels to go through. You do the math. Here are some screenshots to highlight key terms. Global governance means one government. Notice how they even wrote on the first line that nationalist backlash has made this difficult. That's the revolt by those who are awakening. You can blatantly see how this one government system affects all other topics and tentacles, and each topic goes down 200 levels. Look closely and you will see the interaction with anti-globalism, the Great Reset, transnational actors, civic participation, artificial intelligence, robotics, human cyborgs, and on and on. Question: if global governance is so good, why do they have to lie to us about it? I mean, if it is truly for the greater good of the planet, isn't there a better way of doing this than to cause death, pain, and destruction? And if they are lying now, what else will they be lying about? The complexities of this website are mind-blowing and nefarious. The Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset. Know these terms. They are the plan for the next step, has ground the world to a halt. This is the plan. Here's a quote directly from their website. Using quote to harness the power of revolution to change the economy. Characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. In its most pessimistic, dehumanized form, the Fourth Industrial Revolution may indeed have the potential to robotize humanity and thus to deprive us of our heart and soul. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will change not only what we do, but also who we are. It will affect our identity and all the issues associated with it. Our sense of privacy, our notions of ownership, our consumption patterns, the time we devote to work and leisure, and how we develop our careers, cultivate our skills, meet people, and nurture relationships. It is already changing our health and leading to a quantified self, and sooner than we think, it may lead to human augmentation. Notice COVID links to every single topic in the wheel. That's because COVID is the gateway to consumption of humanity by the New World Order. The Great Reset description shows that it's absolutely impossible for this plan to have been contrived in a few months or even a few years. There is an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of COVID-19 crisis. To improve the state of the World Economic Forum is starting the Great Reset. Look at these timelines I found about the history of UN meetings. Now that you know what the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset are, look at the years. My research also led me to read about the New World Order and the One World Government Agenda. One plan is to remove the requirement for food labeling and to restrict and ultimately prohibit the sale of all natural health products. Eventually, eating from nature will not be allowed. They'll provide us with Monsanto-contrived food, focus on a specific number of calories per day, provided by a combination of proteins and carbohydrates. Agenda 2030 is an action plan devised by the UN and signed by 196 governments. One of its expansive goals is the depopulation of humanity. We are too many, they say. It is promoted by the elites as a way to save the planet, and the plan is to be implemented by governments worldwide. Look at these statements made by various globalists revealing their plans. This is the year when world leaders must work with all sectors of society to repair and reinvigorate our systems of cooperation, not just for a short-term benefit, but for tackling our deep-rooted risks. The World Economic Forum in January 2020. The present vast overpopulation, now far beyond the world carrying capacity, cannot be answered by future reductions in the birth rate due to contraception, sterilization, and abortion, but must be met in the present by the reduction in numbers presently existing. This must be done by whatever means necessary. UN statement. A total world population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. Ted Turner, speaking for the UN. Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized nations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? Official statement by Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN and Chairman of the Earth Summit 2015. We've got to ride this global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic and environmental policy. Timothy Worth, President, UN Foundation. The world today has 7.7 billion people. That's heading up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, and reproductive health services, we could lower the population by perhaps 10 or 15%. Bill Gates, TED Talk 2010. The bulk of humanity has become expendable. We were good for the elites to have around when they could exploit our labor and enjoy the fruits of humanity's talents. The information research and advisory firm Gartner predicts that at least 1/3 of jobs now performed by humans will be replaced by software, robots, and smart machines by 2025. Robots do not require food, employee benefits, or wages. They can work 24/7, 365 days a year without complaining or needing a break. According to Ray Kurzweil, the director of engineering at Google, by 2029, robots and other forms of technology will have reached human levels of intelligence and functionality and beyond. Replacing humans was predicted as far back as the 1960s. The time has arrived for this to become a reality. By 2030, there will be no natural babies born. 0. All babies will be chosen with a specific design and program. I heard this on a video from the World Economic Forum site, and I fact-checked this bizarre statement 4 times. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation about who is behind these plans is the Luciferian agendas that they all seem to hold. For example, David Spangle, director of the Planetary Initiative at the UN, wrote in his 1978 Reflections on the Christ. You can find that in chapter 4, pages 44 through 45. No one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation. This is a topic for a different day, but know that the hydrogel intended to be in the COVID vaccine is activated by an enzyme called luciferase. This is true. You need to do your research and see that it is true, and you can find that on the UN site, digging through a lot of tentacles. Now, this is a call to action. I'm sorry if this information is hard for you to hear, but it is my duty to tell you and warn you what is happening. I do have to hope that we can change the course of this coming travesty. I must speak up and stand up. We must think clearly and operate from a place of unity and love. That's how we foil their plans. They want us afraid and divided. They don't want us powerful, and we are powerful when we are empowered with knowledge and we work together with love and respect. We were all born of this time for a reason, and we all have a role to play. Praying for peace and taking action is critical for the preservation of the human species. It's going to get darker and uglier before it gets better, but the truth will win. Stay strong, keep your vibrations high, and radiate love. That's what the world needs. We need to collectively raise our vibration and our spiritual position. We are fighting powers and principalities of darkness. I believe love and truth will always win in the end. You can see more at sarahwestall.com or go to the great work of Grace Van Berkom on our website at gracevanberkom.com. And for those of you that would like to support my work in independent journalism, please go to patreon.com/sarahwestall. You will get exclusive interviews, discounts on great products, and much more. And please remember to sign up for my newsletter at sarahwestall.com.